All right. Another thing that we're hoping for our leaders to do is to keep up on important skills. Like I said, there are not infinite, but there's a ton of information on being small group leaders, keeping up on information. What skills are good for a small group leader to know? And we could spend a week straight here and not cover them all, and you'd be bored to tears and ready to kill me. So what we're going to try and do is basically provide you with the tools that you need, resources so that you can study stuff that's important to you. If you have a crisis situation come up in your group and you're like, I have no clue how to handle this, what we're going to try and have is a resource available that you can go to and relatively quickly, like an hour or less, be able to study up on something. So I'm not looking at handing you a 600-page book and say, here's a psychological evaluation of blah, blah, blah. But maybe having an hour-long presentation in audio or video, something that you could go online and click on and say, how do I handle this sort of situation in my group? And you can study up on it and have a good idea of what's going on. I wanted to sort of share with you 3 different stages of being a leader and sort of some of the skills that are necessary for folks in those positions. So new leaders would be our first group of folks. Folks just starting out, first time maybe being a leader. And some of the things that a new leader might want to learn would be the role of a shepherd leader, how to be a leader like Jesus, who cares for people. Number 2, inviting people into the group. So how do you make that step and say, I haven't seen them in church before. How do I, how do I invite them to come over to our group? Or what are ways of putting a meeting together that would be great to have them come? Those kind of things. Leading a discussion. How do you make sure the conversation flows and that we're actually accomplishing the task that we're here for? Guiding prayer time. Are you gonna go popcorn, or are you just gonna go around the room? How are you gonna do prayer time? Promoting safety. How do we promote an environment where people are comfortable to talk, knowing that one of the big things, frankly, especially in Oostburg, is confidentiality. Knowing that when you leave a group, so-and-so is not going to go to their uncle and tell them that whatever you just told them in group, you're having a bad time because of some business deal, and they go and tell their uncle who's on one side of the business deal, and now the whole town is all mad because you blurted something out in a meeting that you were just going there to be comforted about. So we need to have a safe environment for people to be able to talk and discuss. Building a team. How do you find people who are good at certain things and put together your group in such a way that they, who's going to be the one to lead the meeting. You know who's going to be the one to make the hospital visit. You know who's going to be the one to whatever. You see what I'm saying? Taking people's spiritual gifts and plugging them into places that are helpful. Casting a vision. How do you help your group understand this is why we're here? Why are we here? What kind of things could we do as a group? That's one of the reasons I did up in the beginning of the first things that we talked about today. Casting a vision for where could we be in 10 years. Us as a group, where are we going to be in 5? What are we going to be doing in 10? Do we want to be where we are right now in a few years from now? What kind of things can we do for God in the next period of time? And then finally, forming a covenant. A group covenant is an agreement that a group might put together, and I think it's a good thing to do. It doesn't have to be super formal, but just a conversation with the members of your group saying simple things. It can be very simple. What time are we meeting? How long will we meet? If we say we're going to meet for an hour and a half, and it's an hour and 40, do I have permission to get up and leave? Because I have to go somewhere as soon as we're done. Say you're a lunch meeting, and you're a lunch meeting of business people. You've got to know that you're going to be done within that hour, because they got to get back to work. If you've got kids, are you going to have daycare provided at that meeting? How are you going to work your meeting? Are you going to have 15 minutes of prayer at the beginning, or are you going to do your lesson up front and then do your prayer at the end? If you're planning to, if you can't make the meeting, Are we going to have people call in advance so that we don't sit here waiting for them for 20 minutes before we get started? Those kind of things they put together in a covenant. And you'd be surprised. We were in a, you would think it sounds like stuff that you would need to say to a group that is a little dysfunctional. I mean, if they don't know what time they're meeting, how in the world? But Becca and I had a group in California that we loved. It was very good. We loved the people in that group. One of the things we wrestled with is that two of us were seminary students and the other guy was a theological nerd. He loved it. And we would have, it would be us and then a number of the wives, and all the kids would be in the next room over, and the wives would end up, at least one of them would be the one to try and corral the kids, while conversation got so deep that a lot of, some of the folks just couldn't, they weren't grasping what was going on, so at times we would have sort of an exodus of the women to the next room where they would be doing their thing watching the kids, and it would get long and late. And so even in a group where things were good, we had questions of, how are we handling the kids? Do we want to rotate this among different people? How long, at what point are we going to cut it off and say we're done so that people with kids can get home and put them to bed, those kind of things. So real important stuff to look at. So questions on those, thoughts on those? And I'll show you in a little bit how we're going to do some of these training stuff for you. The next stage of leadership would be intermediate leaders. These are kind of boring names for these. But new leader, intermediate leaders, and some skills that an intermediate leader might want to have. Intentional shepherding. How do you purposefully work on walking somebody through issues in their lives? How do you come up next to someone and say, spiritually speaking, how do you come alongside them and say, you don't have a job right now, and how are you going to handle this period of time in your life? Just being intentional in how you help people go, not just crisis. I keep coming back to these sort of crisis periods, but even good times. How do you help lead people through periods in their lives and come closer to Christ as a result? 2, conflict resolution. 2 people in your group bang heads a lot. How do you mediate between them? How do you make for a situation that both people will be happy reasonably and be able to continue on in good community within your group? 3, working with challenging members. If you've got a person that dominates the conversation all the time and nobody else feels like they can talk, how do you handle that? Truth telling. How do we move beyond shallow levels of conversation and get into issues in people's lives? What if you see a problem issue in someone's life, and the example we used earlier was somebody keeps picking on their wife. How do you take the truth of God, of the Word of God that says, love your wives, and come to this person and say, basically, I mean, you could just be blunt and say, I think it's horrible the way you're treating your wife. You're a jerk. This is ungodly. Blah 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 blah. You're not going to get a great reception that way, especially going into someone else's marriage, the issue of someone else's marriage. But how do we find ways to bring up those kind of topics so that they see it and they want to change it and don't just get defensive about it? So how do we tell the truth in life-changing ways?